Okay, welcome back. So today we're looking at May-June 2020, question paper 11. So we start at the bottom. Again, this is a question you might have seen in previous years. We're saying which balance payment or which balance improved between 2011 and 2012. So we've got four different components of our current account balance. Our balance of payments in goods, minus 1.61 to minus 5.23. What's happened? We've had a decrease in the balance of payments in goods. We can see here we've also had a decrease in the balance of payments in services. We've obviously started to import more services. Balance of payment in primary income has also gone down because it's a positive figure, from 14.04 to 13.55. So the one that's improved from minus 1.11 to minus 1.02, we're getting closer to breaking even, is our balance of payment in secondary income. So a very simple question to start. Correct answer is D. Okay. So another current account balance of payment question. What is included as part of the current account on the balance of payments? And we can see, if you want to get the correct answer, just look down below. It's the trade of goods and services, which we can see is our components, right? So it's literally given in question 30. Investment in other countries by manufacturers. It's not included. Money withdrawn from a bank account, not included. And government income and expenditure, that's part of the government budget. Investment in other countries to be included in their current account balance of payments. Okay, 28. Many low-income countries rely on exports of raw materials such as coffee and iron ore to earn them foreign currency. What's a disadvantage of this? Okay, so like what risks are they open to, essentially? So countries have a constant demand. That's not going to be a disadvantage, is it? That's going to be an advantage, because we can accurately predict then how much we'll be able to get or what the demand for those materials will be. International trade only benefits the importing countries. Again, that's not true. International trade benefits the importing and the exporting countries, because we can import goods for cheap and we can export them to other countries that can buy them for cheap prices also. It's necessary for low-income countries to belong to a free trade area. Again, not true. Not a disadvantage of having to rely on exports of raw materials. But a disadvantage of relying on them is that the raw materials are variable in their prices, so the prices will fluctuate. So one month we might pay less, but the next month we might have to pay more for those same raw materials. Right, depending on how the prices of coffee or the prices of iron ore fluctuate. Okay, so that is a disadvantage because it's going to change our revenue from month to month on our exports. Okay, question 27. What is a quota? So we've gone through this before, right? A quota is a limit on the number of imports that we can bring into a country. Okay, so therefore correct answer is C. A tax on imports, that's what we call a tariff, not a quota, but another form of protectionism. An administrative or technical barrier, that's what we might call red tape. And a government grant to encourage production, that would be a form of a subsidy, okay, which would be given to exporters. But it's not going to be a quota. A quota only affects imports. What changes usually occur when a country develops and is able to provide free healthcare and good living conditions? Okay, so birth rate here might be a difficult one, okay? the birth rate will actually go down, right? As we're providing good living conditions, and as the country is getting wealthier, or they develop, which is what they've told us here, the rate at which people will have children will reduce, because they're going to focus on their careers more. Birth rate will go down, but the death rate will also go down, because we're told that we're providing free healthcare, so we're going to be able to treat more sick people. And because we're told the country is developing, we can assume that labour productivity is likely to increase. How does the country develop? Develops by increasing its GDP, which is likely to mean that our labour productivity has increased also. So if we match them correctly, we should be left with an answer of A. '25. Additional 700,000 UK children and pensioners fell into relative poverty. What might be a reason for this? So first we need to remember what relative poverty is. Relative poverty is where we can still afford the basic necessities of life, but we might feel poor in comparison to other people around us. Okay? So direct taxes had increased and indirect taxes had fallen. That's not going to apply. Okay? Because direct taxes had increased, it depends on the type of taxation that's being used as well, right? So progressive taxes will redistribute income and take more people out of relative poverty. Regressive taxes will bring more people into relative poverty, but we're not given that information. If real domestic product rises faster than the population, the country is growing or becoming richer in very simple terms. So what's that going to do? That's going to move more people out of relative poverty, not make them fall into relative poverty. And the same thing with the debt rate exceeding the birth rate. That's just going to affect the population. It may mean, or it's possible of course, that it can affect relative poverty as well, but its main effect will be a decrease in the population if we've more people dying than being born. Something that would affect relative poverty, the real value of government welfare benefits has fallen. So essentially, the government is paying people less this year than they were paying them last year. And they're going to pay that money to low-income individuals, right? Like unemployment benefits, for example. So somebody who's unemployed is getting less money this year than they were previously getting last year. That's going to make them poorer in comparison to other people in the country. Okay, what distinguishes a more developed country from a less developed country? Okay, so we think about it this way. A more developed country is going to have a higher real GDP than a less developed country. That's how we measure how developed they are, right? In monetary terms anyway. The inflation rates may still be high in the developing and developed country. The interest rates may still be high in the developed or developing country, depending on how they're trying to influence aggregate demand, what type of monetary policy they're using. And the natural resources are higher in a more developed country. Again, that may be true, but that doesn't distinguish the reason why they're richer. The reason why they're richer is because, like we said, with real GDP, they obviously have to be earning more money on average in the developed economy compared to the less developed country. Okay, table gives information about 3 economic indicators in 4 countries. What might be concluded from this information? So, start at the bottom. Country with the lowest unemployment rate had the lowest inflation. Lowest unemployment rate here is country Z. Their inflation is 2.1%, but we can see that it's higher in X and Y. So that's wrong and can't be concluded. Country with the lowest inflation had the highest unemployment. 1.4 in country W, 10.2 in country W, but we can see it's higher in country X and country Y, so that's also wrong. Countries with higher interest rates had lower unemployment, so countries with higher interest rates here, again we can see that's wrong, because in country Y it's 7.3% rate of interest but 14.2% unemployment. But in country W, our interest rate is the lowest, but comparing it to country Z, the interest rate is higher and the unemployment rate is lower, right? So it doesn't match up. The higher interest rate countries don't have lower unemployment, because what we can see here is that this one, country Z, has a higher interest rate, lower unemployment, but in Y and X, interest rates are higher, unemployment is higher, but we still have a low interest rate with country W and a high unemployment rate, higher than it is in country Z. So the correct answer is obviously left with A. Countries with higher inflation have higher interest rates. So let's match that up. Higher inflation 3.7, and it's the highest in countries X, so that would match. Second, 3.6, 7.3, that would match too. And then the third country Z, the higher the inflation, 2.1, the higher the rate of interest. So those ones do match. Okay, what would not be required in the construction of consumer prices CPI? Okay, so we need to remember what's the components of our CPI calculation. We need to have a base year. We need to have a representative range of items, that's our basket of goods and services. And we need to have a weighting for that basket of goods and services. Okay. And then we need to have the price changes of them also as something that's not included in here but is in the CPI. We just multiply them by each other to calculate our rate of inflation. But we don't need the average wage levels in order to calculate it. We do need how much they're spending on food, entertainment, etc., but we don't need their income to calculate inflation, because that will distort the values for the whole economy. Okay, what may directly cause economic growth? So again, think about it this way. Higher economic growth means that real GDP is increasing. Okay. If we've got higher imports, what's that going to do? Imports is a component of AD. AD will move to the left and real GDP will decrease. Okay, so it's not going to be A. Higher unemployment also means that our real GDP is decreasing. Obviously that's not going to allow us to grow if we've got less people working, because we're going to be making less goods and services. Higher taxation is a contractionary fiscal policy, and it will also move AD to the left, decreasing real GDP. So the only suitable option here is if we've higher levels of resources, which means we can make more goods and more services, allowing us to increase our real GDP. Okay. Table shows selected indicators for the labour market of an economy in 2018-2014. According to the table, what is the most likely type of unemployment in 2018? So we need to compare what's changed between 2018 and 2019, right? So what we can see is that in 2018, labour force is the same. We've got more people working, but we've got more people who are long-term unemployed, okay? Less people in manufacturing and more people in services. So we've got to remember our three types of unemployment. Now, the two types that are long-term are structural unemployment and cyclical unemployment. Okay? Structural is where industries will decline, we'll have regional unemployment. For example, people don't want to use coal anymore, so we might have towns that are set up with coal mines, and people will lose their jobs and have to move to different industries, or it could be due to advances in technology. Like in supermarkets, we've now got self-scan checkout registers instead of having people working on the tills themselves. Cyclical is through a lack of AD. So, frictional unemployment is short-term unemployment. Seasonal is a type of frictional, so it can't be that. And in this case, it's going to be structural. Why? Because we can see that we've now got less people working in manufacturing, so that would tell us that there's been a decline in the industries. Okay. Cyclical, it's not going to be concluded from the table because cyclical is resulting from a lack of AD, and we're not sure what the total demand is, but we can assume it's more because we've got more employed workers in the country in 2018 than 2014. But we've got less in manufacturing, so it's likely to have been structural due to advances in technology or due to changes in demand for manufacturing products. Okay, question 19. The government redistributes income more evenly. What is most likely to increase? Okay, so the incentive to work, that may possibly increase, yeah, but it's unlikely because they may have redistributed income by increasing transfer payments that they make. The level of savings, again, that might increase, but it's unlikely. Savings may still be the same, they may just have redistributed income from one individual to another. So the person whose income has been redistributed, the high income earner, they may save less, and the low income earner may save more, but the total amount of savings may stay the same. The need for welfare payments will definitely decrease. Because we're redistributing income, people will not need as much welfare payments as they're more likely to have more income at the lower end of the spectrum. But what is likely to increase is the rate of inflation. Okay, redistributing income means that people are going to have more money to spend on goods and services, so we'll have our low income people buying more goods and services than they did before, which will increase the total demand. Whereas the high income earners are likely to save less but still spend the same amount, because again, they'll only buy what they need or what they want in the month. That's not going to change whether their income decreases slightly or increases slightly, because they've got more than enough income to cover what they pay for anyway. Okay, government wishes to increase economic growth, so again we're looking to increase real GDP. What would not be likely to achieve this aim? Okay, central bank encourages bank lending. That will, because it's likely to move AD to the right. Yeah, it's expansionary monetary policy. How do we encourage bank lending? We reduce the interest rates. So we can see that B is the exact same as A. Decreasing the interest rates is what encourages the bank lending. So that would also cause economic growth. So government subsidizes new industries. Again, that is likely to increase economic growth. If it becomes cheaper for the new industries to make goods and services, they're more likely to succeed in the first place, and they're also going to supply more goods and services to the market at a cheaper price, which means that the demand for those goods and those services will increase. Whereas imposing or increasing indirect taxes like a sales tax or VAT is unlikely to increase economic growth. It's going to result in less goods and services being consumed because it now becomes more expensive to consume them. Okay, 17 is very simple. When is the budget described as balanced? So we just got to remember what a government budget is. Government budget is government revenue, so I'll just say GR, and government expenditure. Okay, so when is it balanced? It's balanced when their revenue is equal to their expenditure. So we can see that that's C. Okay, once we know what a budget is, we should not be getting that question wrong. Okay, what is not included in public expenditure? So remember, public expenditure is the money that the government are spending. Okay, so subsidies to local bus companies from local government. We can see that's money the government is spending, so that will be public expenditure. Investment in defence by the central government. Again, government is involved. That will be public expenditure. Interest payments on government borrowing. Again, that's money the government has to pay back. So it is money they're spending. But capital spending by firms, the government's not going to be involved in that. That's going to be the firms only. Spending on investing into their capital infrastructure. Okay, question 15. How is a government most likely to prevent the growth of monopolies? Okay, so we've got a number of different ways that we can prevent the growth of monopolies, but there is the main one that they use. Okay, establishing nationalized industries, that's unlikely. They could do that, but they want the free market to work, right? Because it's more efficient. And nationalizing industries will be extremely expensive and inefficient. Encouraging mergers in the private sector, that's not going to prevent the growth of a monopoly. That is actually going to encourage the growth of a monopoly. And why is that? Because by encouraging mergers, they're saying, let's take Coca-Cola and Pepsi, let's merge them together, and they're only going to sell Coca-Cola. Okay, that's going to take away products from the market and offer consumers less choice. And if they promote the benefits of economies of scale, again, economies of scale is something that the firm themselves has to achieve as long as they're internal. So a government is not going to be able to promote benefits of economies of scale. But what they can do is they can reduce the barriers to entry into an industry. So they can make it easier for other companies to enter the industry, and then those companies can eventually challenge the market share of the monopolies if they do so. Okay, question 14. What is most likely to lead to an increase in labor productivity? Okay, so we'll start at the bottom. An increase in the number of firms in the industry. That doesn't necessarily mean that labor productivity would increase. That may just mean that there's more profit to be made in the industry, right? But the workers may still be producing the same amount. Maybe it's just that the costs have come down in the industry, right? An increase in demand for the industry's product. Again, something that can happen which will benefit the firms, but it's not going to mean that workers will be more productive. Increase in income tax rates. Less people will want to work, so it may decrease labor productivity because we may have less people working. But if we increase capital investment will be used in order to make our goods and services more productive, and therefore we may be able to train labor to become more productive at the same time, right? So because of the capital equipment or machinery that's being used, that may be more efficient and allow us to make more goods and services, meaning as a consequence of that, the labor in the industry may be able to produce more as a final product. Okay, profit maximization, which is similar to March QP12. And what we said was very simple. It's just which one has the biggest gap between total revenue and total cost. Okay, so at what level of output? So we can see at output A, our total profit would be 300. At output B, our total profit would be 400. Total revenue minus total cost. C, 300. And D, 200. So at what level of output are we making the most profit? We're making the most profit here at B, at 200 units of output. Okay, so table shows total fixed and total variable costs, different levels of output. Which level of output is average total cost the lowest? Okay, so how do we calculate our average total cost? We need to add our total fixed and total variable to get our total cost and divide it by our output. Okay, so for A, for example, here, that would be 1,200 plus 1,200 equals 2,400. 2,400 divided by 100 should give us 24 per unit. B, 1,200 plus 2,000, 3,200, 3,200 divided by 200, 16 per unit. C, 2,700 plus 1,200 gives us 3,900. 3,900 divided by 300 gives us 13 per unit. And then D, 3,600 plus 1,200 is 4,800 divided by 400 is 12 per unit. So D is going to be our lowest average total cost. Okay, people's income decreases. How is the proportion spent on food and leisure likely to change? Okay, so what we need to remember here is when our income goes down, we're not saying the total amount that we spend. We're saying the percentage of the money that we spend. That's what the proportion means. So when our income goes down, we're more likely to spend a higher percentage of our income on food because food is the basic necessity we need, and we're more likely to cut back on our leisure expenses because our leisure expenses are wants and our food are needs. So food up, leisure down, the percentage of income that we'd spend more likely to increase with food because we need to spend more as we've got less money as a percentage and less on leisure as a percentage of income. Okay, the graph shows women's wages as a percentage of men's wages, so that's the key thing to remember. It's only showing us the women's wages as a percentage of what men earn in year 1 and year 2. Which statement is shown to be by the graph to be true? So young women earn more than older women. The graph doesn't tell us any of that information. Women's wages remain the same between the ages of 40 to 50. The graph also doesn't tell us any of that info. It only tells us the percentage that they earn in comparison to men's income. It doesn't tell us the actual amount. And in year 2, women were earning more than men. That's false. We can see in year 2 they're earning 80% of what a man earns. So the only one that's left in year 2, women were earning a higher percentage of men's wages than in year 1, and we can see that's true. In year 2, at every point along the graph here, no matter what the age, it's higher than it was in year 1. Okay, what combination of influences would increase the level of borrowing by a household? So we're going to look at the influence 1 first, and then we'll do process of elimination. So becoming pensioners is going to reduce the level of borrowing, right? People have less need to borrow when they're older. They're no longer working. Greater wealth, okay, yeah. that can increase the level of borrowing. We've got more security or collateral to provide. Higher interest rate, that's likely to reduce the level of borrowing because it becomes more expensive to borrow. Higher consumer confidence, that could increase the level of borrowing also. So for the second one, lower rate of interest or lower consumer confidence, the lower rate of interest is the one that's likely to increase the level of borrowing. Lower consumer confidence is the opposite of influence 1 here. We know that higher consumer confidence or a confidence in the economy in the future will allow us to borrow more. Okay, question 8. The wage of labour in a firm increases. What is the most likely effect on the production process? Okay, so capital replaces labour immediately. Unlikely. Okay, very hard to remember. Capital as a factor of production is something that's generally not variable in the short run, but is variable in the long run. So in the long run, we can invest in more capital and use the capital to replace the labour, which has become more expensive. Labour is not going to replace capital because we're told that labour has become more expensive. So we're going to look at ways that capital can replace labour instead. But the key thing to identify here is that labour is a factor of production that can be variable in the short run. So labour can replace capital immediately if the cost of capital increases, for example. But capital as a factor is something that changes in the long run or the very long run. Doesn't change in the short run. Takes a long time to implement. Okay, question 7. PES. Lithium is an essential metal for the production of electric cars. Following a 10% increase in the price, supply has increased by 15. Okay, what is the PES for lithium? So remember, to calculate PES, our formula is the percentage change in quantity supplied divided by the percentage change in price. Okay, so just take the figures they've given us. The percentage change in supplies is 15%, and we're told that the percentage change in price is 10%. 15% divided by 10%, what does that give us? That gives us a PES for lithium of 1.05. Okay, the diagram shows market demand and supply curves. To what extent is the market in disequilibrium price P3? Okay, this is really easy. All we have to do is go to P3 and find out where it hits the supply and where it hits the demand. Okay, and the gap between supply and demand, once we're outside of our equilibrium, is always the extent of our disequilibrium. It's the gap that we need to fill in order to get back into equilibrium. So in this case, that's Q3, which we can see here where we hit the supply curve, to Q5, which is where we have our excess demand. So D will be our correct answer there. So all we have to do is go to P3 and then match up where we hit demand and supply. Okay, what aspect of demerit goods means they are overproduced? Clear product information, that's not true. Information failure is something that affects demerits. That's why people continue to consume demerits even though they know they're bad for them. If they have clear product information, that will reduce the consumption of demerits. It's not a reason why they're overproduced. High external costs, that is the reason. Okay? They're overproduced because they generate external costs which are negative effects for third parties. So we need to reduce the consumption of them to reach the socially optimum level. In other words, the level that will benefit society the most. High taxes, again, is not a reason why they're overproduced, and low consumer demand is again not a reason. Demand or consumer demand would be high if they're overproduced, because suppliers are making them to make a profit, and high product taxes doesn't explain why they're overproduced. It's a method of fixing the overproduction, implementing an indirect tax to reduce the consumption. Okay, what topics included in microeconomics? I won't spend too long on this one. That would be elasticity of demand, because it measures the responsiveness of a change in quantity demand to a change in price for firms. And remember, microeconomics is a study and behavior of individuals, households, firms, and individual markets. Macroeconomics includes everything that will affect a whole economy, which the balance of payments will, inflation will, and economic growth will. Okay, diagram shows a PPC for an economy that can produce cotton and it can produce cars. The economy is at point Q. There's improved technology that can only be used in the production of cars, okay? How would this be represented in the diagram? It's a tricky question, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw essentially what it should do. If there's improved technology that can only be used in the production of cars, what's that going to do? That is going to increase the quantity and quality of resources for cars, which means that we should have the same output for cotton, but our PPC should actually look something like this, where we have a shift in how much cars we can make due to the technology. Okay, so it's tricky because they haven't shown us the shift. They're getting us to identify that the technology would improve the quantity and quality of resources for cars only. Therefore, the movement that would happen is from Q to X, where we can make the same amount of cotton, but using the same level of resources. Because of our improved technology, we can now make more cars with the same resources than we could before. Okay, what is the function of the factors of production? So, very simple. Function of the factors of production is to make goods and services to fulfill wants and needs. Remember, consumers have unlimited wants, so we need to use land, labor, capital, and enterprise to make a good and service so that we can make profit from those consumers. Factors of production don't distribute income evenly. That's progressive income taxes and transfer payments, and also education and training. They don't provide any tax income for the government, and they don't reduce the existence of external costs. They're the demerits we talked about, and we talked about the ways we can fix them. Indirect taxes, provision of information, banning the good or service, none of which are factors of production. Okay, and finally, what is an example of the purchase of a consumer good? So remember, we have two types of goods. We've got consumer and capital. Consumer goods are those which help improve our living standards. And capital goods are those goods that we can take and we can use to help us produce more goods. So a farmer buying additional land, that's capital, because it's going to help us produce more, or help the farmer to produce more crops. Farmer buying fertilizer is also capital, because it's going to help him improve the quality of his crops. And a farmer buying farm equipment, also capital. It's going to help him to make more or to improve the quality of his products. But a farmer buying a television, he'll use it for his own personal consumption to help him improve his living standards, right? Having a TV, he'll be able to sit at home after he has made all his crops and watch some television to improve his standard of living.